Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, just like always, I'll be reading a story for you to listen to in the background. Whether you're playing something, relaxing, or just trying to fall asleep with something on in the room, I'm glad you're here. Before we get into it, leave a comment and let me know what you're doing while listening. I always like reading those. Alright, let's get into the story. So this happened a little over a year ago, and even now I still don't really know what part of it was the worst. Not the job itself, not the money, not even the lies. I think the worst part was how normal it felt at the beginning. Because if something feels wrong right away, your brain knows what to do with it. You get cautious. You put distance between yourself and the situation. But when something feels mostly normal, when it just seems a little strange, a little unusual, a little too good to be true, that's when you step into it before realizing you probably shouldn't have. And that's exactly what I did. At the time, I was in a pretty bad spot financially. Not completely ruined or anything dramatic like that, but bad enough that I was checking my bank app more than I wanted to, moving money between accounts, putting groceries on a credit card, and telling myself it was temporary. I had been freelancing for a while, doing mostly editing work online, and it was one of those stretches where everything sort of dried up at once. Clients got flaky, invoices got delayed, one project got cancelled halfway through, another one suddenly restructured, which is corporate language for we're not paying you what we implied we were going to pay you. So I was applying for random side work, nothing glamorous. Dog walking, delivery apps, temp office gigs, remote moderation, inventory shifts, whatever came up. And one afternoon, while scrolling through listings that all kind of blurred together after a while, I saw one that stood out. The title was Companion/Social Support Role, Flexible Schedule, High Pay Now. If you've ever been desperate enough to look through weird job listings, you know how fast your brain starts rationalizing stuff. Companion could mean anything. Maybe helping an elderly person, maybe driving someone to appointments, maybe just sitting with a person who needed company. The pay was unusually high, not ridiculous, just high enough to make me stop scrolling and read it twice. There wasn't much detail in the listing. It said the role involved spending time with a private client in casual social settings, maintaining a friendly and supportive presence, and helping create consistency in the client's weekly life. That phrase stuck with me a little. Helping create consistency. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It sounded like therapy-adjacent language. Maybe the client had anxiety. Maybe they were isolated. Maybe they were on the spectrum. Who knows? The listing specifically said this was not medical care, not therapy, and not domestic labor, just companionship, conversation, routine presence, and discretion. There was a line near the bottom that said, ideal applicants are calm, socially adaptable, and comfortable with emotional nuance. That part should have warned me, but when you're broke, warning signs often get rebranded in your head as interesting opportunities. So I applied, didn't expect much, just sent over a quick resume and a short message saying I had flexible hours and experience dealing with different personalities through freelance client work. Honestly, I forgot about it after that, until the next morning. I got an email back, not from a company, not even from a normal hiring address. Just from a person, a woman named Elise, very short email, very direct. She thanked me for applying, said the role was private but legitimate, and asked if I'd be available for a paid in-person meeting that same week. A paid meeting. That was the first thing that felt slightly unusual, but again, not unusual enough, because when you're behind on rent, slightly unusual is not a deal breaker, so I replied yes. She sent me an address, not an office. A hotel lounge downtown. That was the second thing that felt off. Still, I went, because at that point, off was less important to me than paying. I got there early. The hotel was nicer than I expected. Quiet, expensive looking, one of those places where even the chairs look like they cost more than your monthly groceries. I sat in the lounge area for maybe 10 minutes before a woman approached me. Mid-40s maybe, very composed, very polished. Not cold exactly, but the kind of person who makes you sit up a little straighter without meaning to. She introduced herself as Elise and thanked me for coming. No resume in hand, no paperwork, no laptop, nothing that made it feel like a normal interview. She just sat down across from me and started asking questions, not job questions, not really. She asked if I was good at making people comfortable, if I ever found myself mirroring the energy of whoever I was with. If I was good at remembering details from conversations, if people tended to open up to me quickly, if I was able to maintain a consistent demeanor even when a social situation felt a little unusual. That was the wording she used, a little unusual, and I remember actually smiling slightly when she said that because it was the first honest-sounding phrase in the entire conversation. I asked her what exactly the job was. She paused for a second before answering. Then she said, we're looking for someone to spend time with a person who responds well to stable social familiarity. That sentence meant almost nothing, and I think my face showed that because she added, you would be keeping someone company, having coffee, going for walks, maybe eating lunch together, the kind of interaction most people get naturally. I asked if it was elder care. She said no. I asked if it was some kind of casework. She said no. I asked if the person had a disability, and she said that's not the framework I'd use. That answer stayed with me because it was technically an answer, but not a useful one. Still, I kept going. I asked why the pay was so high. She looked at me for a second, then said, because consistency is difficult to find. That was the kind of answer that feels profound for about half a second before you realize it still doesn't tell you anything. But she must have sensed I was starting to hesitate, because that's when she finally became more specific. She said the client was a man in his early 30s named Daniel. He had gone through an emotionally destabilizing period in the past year. He had withdrawn socially. He had difficulty forming new attachments. He responded poorly to abrupt changes in people's behavior, and the job essentially was to become part of a stable and low-pressure social structure around him. A friend, not officially. Not in those words, but close enough that the distinction didn't feel especially meaningful. That was the moment I should have left. I know that now, because there's a difference between being hired to assist someone and being hired to simulate something emotional, and this was clearly the second one. But the thing is, she didn't present it that way. She framed it as support, structure, presence, routine, and she was very good at making every strange thing sound thoughtful, careful, necessary. Then she slid an envelope across the table. Inside was cash, just for showing up, a lot more than I expected. And when I looked up, she said, if you accept the role, we'd begin with 2 short meetings this week. Very light, very easy, no pressure. I remember asking the question that, looking back, mattered more than anything else. I said, does Daniel know this is a job? And for the first time in the whole conversation, she hesitated. Not long, just enough. Then she said, Daniel knows that people are being encouraged to reconnect with him. That is not what I asked, and I knew it, but I also knew exactly why she answered it that way, because the real answer would have ended the conversation. And maybe it should have, but I took the envelope, and before I left that hotel lounge, I said yes. At the time, I told myself it was temporary, just a weird short-term gig, just coffee, walks, conversation, easy money, nothing more than that. I had no idea yet that I wasn't being hired to become someone's friend. I was being hired to replace one. I didn't meet Daniel right away, which looking back was intentional. After I agreed to take the job, Elise didn't send me a contract. No onboarding, no official paperwork, just a message. Short, direct. First meeting will be casual, no pressure, just observe and match energy. Details below. That phrasing stuck with me. Observe and match energy. It didn't sound like instructions for helping someone. It sounded like instructions for blending in. The location she sent wasn't a clinic, not an office. A cafe, small place. Quiet, the kind of spot people go to work on laptops or sit alone for long periods without being bothered. She told me to arrive 10 minutes early and sit at a specific table. Not meet him outside, not introduce myself, just sit. That was the third thing that felt off, but again, not off enough to stop. I got there early, sat where she told me to sit, ordered coffee, and waited. Those 10 minutes felt longer than they should have. Because now that I was actually there, it started to feel real. Not just a weird listing, not just a vague conversation, something was about to happen. At exactly the time she said, a guy walked in. Early 30s, normal, completely normal. That was the first surprising thing. No visible signs of anything unusual, no awkward behavior, no hesitation. He walked in like anyone else, looked around, spotted the table, and walked straight toward me. That part made my stomach drop a little. Because he didn't hesitate, didn't scan the room. He already knew where to go, which meant one thing, he was told I'd be there. But how, and more importantly, what was he told? He sat down across from me and gave a small nod. Hey, just that, not confused, not questioning like we had already met before. I said hey back, tried to match his tone, keep it natural because that's what I had been told to do, match energy. He asked how my week was, and that's when it hit me. That's not how strangers talk. That's how people who already know each other talk. I paused for half a second, not enough to be obvious, then answered like it was normal. Pretty good, just busy. He nodded, like that was expected, like that answer fit into something. And the conversation just continued, not awkward, not forced, but also not entirely real. Because the whole time there was this underlying feeling, like I had missed something. Like I had walked into the middle of an ongoing interaction. He asked about work, about what I'd been doing lately. Not in a getting-to-know-you way, in a checking-in way, like he already had context, and I had to keep adjusting my answers carefully. Not too vague, not too specific, because I didn't know what version of me he expected. That was the hardest part, not the conversation, the uncertainty. I didn't know if I was supposed to be myself or a version of someone else. And I didn't want to say the wrong thing. So I stayed neutral, answered simply, mirrored his tone, and slowly I noticed something. He wasn't leading the conversation. He was following a rhythm. There were pauses, not awkward ones, expected ones, like there were points in the conversation where something should be said, and when it was, he just waited. That's when it started feeling strange again. Not creepy, just structured, like there were invisible lines in the interaction. And we were both supposed to stay inside them. At one point he mentioned something, a place, a restaurant. He said we should go there again sometime. Again, that word sat there for a second because I had never been there, at least not with him, but I didn't correct him, I just nodded. Yeah, that'd be good. And he smiled slightly, like that was the right response. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about being a companion. This was about continuity. He wasn't meeting me for the first time. He was continuing something that had existed before I showed up, and I was filling that space. That realization changed everything, because now the question wasn't, what is this job? It was, who was here before me? The meeting lasted about 40 minutes. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden shifts, no obvious red flags, just conversation, normal on the surface, but slightly misaligned underneath. When we got up to leave, he said, same time next week. Not a question, more like a confirmation. I nodded again. Yeah, and he left, just like that, no hesitation, no second look, like everything had gone exactly as expected. I sat there for a few minutes after he left, trying to process it, because nothing had gone wrong, but nothing had felt completely right either. A few minutes later my phone buzzed, message from Elise. Good, you adapted quickly. That wording bothered me. Not good job, not how did it go. Adapted, like that was the goal, like I wasn't there to interact, I was there to adjust. That night I kept thinking about one thing, not the conversation, not the structure, just that single word he used. Again, because whatever this was, it didn't start with me, and I had just stepped into the middle of it. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was scared. Nothing about it felt dangerous, but it didn't sit right, it was too smooth. That's the best way I can describe it. Nothing went wrong, no awkward silences, no strange behavior, but it felt pre-shaped, like I had followed a script without ever seeing it. The next morning I got another message from Elise. No greeting, no small talk, just second meeting scheduled, minor adjustment needed, details below. That phrase again, minor adjustment, like the first meeting had been a test, and now something needed to be corrected. She sent me a short list. Not instructions exactly, more like notes. Be slightly more familiar in tone, reference shared experiences, when possible maintain relaxed posture, avoid over-explaining. I read that list 3 times, because none of those things made sense in a normal context. You do reference shared experiences with someone you just met, unless you're expected to act like you didn't just meet them. That realization hit harder the second time, because now it was confirmed. I wasn't just filling space. I was continuing a version of someone else, and the adjustments weren't about helping him. They were about making me fit better into that role. I almost backed out right there, closed the message, put my phone down, sat there for a few minutes just thinking, because it had crossed a line. From unusual job into something else, something I couldn't fully explain but definitely didn't understand. Then I checked my bank account, and that ended the debate. That's the part nobody likes to admit. Sometimes the decision isn't about what feels right, it's about what you can afford to walk away from. And at that point I couldn't, so I went to the second meeting, same cafe, same table. This time I didn't feel early, I felt expected, and that alone made the whole thing feel different. Daniel walked in again at the exact same time, same pace, same glance around the room, same direct path to the table, and again no hesitation. Hey, but this time there was a slight shift. A little more relaxed, like he recognized me more, like we had already built something, which in his mind we had. I matched it, slightly more familiar tone. Hey, how have you been? That question felt strange coming out of my mouth, but it worked. He leaned back slightly. Not bad, just been keeping busy. That sounded like a continuation, not a new conversation, and I realized something in that moment. The more I leaned into it, the smoother it became, the less I questioned it. The more natural it felt, which should have been reassuring, but wasn't, because it meant I was getting better at it, better at being someone I was. At one point I tried something. I referenced the restaurant he mentioned before, casually. Did you end up going back there, just testing, seeing how he'd react? And he didn't hesitate. Yeah, it was all right this time. This time, that word again, he was building on something that didn't exist, or at least something I hadn't been part of. And I was reinforcing it, without meaning to, without even knowing how far it went. The conversation lasted longer this time, almost an hour, and by the end of it something had changed. Not in him, in me, because I stopped noticing the gaps as much, stopped questioning every detail, started flowing with it, and that's when it became dangerous, not because anything bad happened, but because it stopped feeling wrong. When we left he said something new. Same day next week, not same time. Same day, like the schedule had always been like that. I nodded again. And this time it felt automatic, not forced, not careful, just part of it. That night Elise sent another message. Better, continue building continuity, avoid introducing new variables. That line stuck with me. Avoid introducing new variables. That's not how you talk about people, that's how you talk about systems. And that's when I realized something I hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't about Daniel learning to reconnect. This was about maintaining something that already existed, and I was just the latest version of it. After that second meeting, I started thinking less about the job itself and more about the person I was replacing, because by that point there was no other way to frame it. This wasn't random companionship. It wasn't casual support. It wasn't just being there for someone. It was substitution, carefully managed substitution. And once that idea settled in, a lot of smaller details started feeling worse. The instructions, the tone adjustments, the emphasis on continuity, the way Daniel never treated anything like a first meeting, all of it pointed in the same direction. There had been someone before me. Someone close enough to him that a stranger could be trained to imitate the shape of their presence. And instead of walking away from that realization, I made the mistake of getting curious. That's always how it happens, right? If something is obviously dangerous, you pull back. But if something is just strange enough, you lean in. You start thinking maybe one more conversation will clear it up. Maybe one more detail will make the whole thing make sense. So I stayed. And over the next week, I kept checking my messages from Elise. Not because there were many, there weren't. Actually, that was part of what made it feel strange. Her messages were always short, always purposeful. No warmth, no unnecessary words, just logistics and corrections. Like he responded well to reduced hesitation. Do not overcompensate with enthusiasm. Keep your recall simple and consistent. That last one bothered me most. Keep your recall simple and consistent, because recall means memory, or at least performance of memory. And if I was being told how to manage recall, then that meant one thing. At some point, I was expected to reference things that hadn't happened, or at least hadn't happened to me. The third meeting was different from the first two, different location. A park this time, late afternoon. One of those city parks that's nice enough to feel intentional but ordinary enough that nobody really pays attention to anyone else there. Elise's message said, walk with him, sit if he sits, let him choose pace. Again, not human instructions, behavioral ones. I got there early and waited near the entrance. Daniel showed up a few minutes later, same relaxed expression, same sense that I was not new to him. Away before we even started walking, he said, did you ever find that charger? I stared at him for maybe half a second too long, because that wasn't vague. That wasn't a restaurant mention or a repeated phrase, that was specific, and it was personal enough to sound casual, like a follow-up from an earlier conversation, something that would be completely normal between actual friends, but not between us, because I had never said anything about a charger, not to him, not to Elise. Not to anyone connected to this, and what made it worse was that I had been looking for a charger the week before. At home, alone, that's what hit me first. Not how does he know that, but why does that sound familiar? I answered carefully. Yeah, I found one, and he nodded like that fit, like the conversation had stayed on track. Then we started walking. I didn't bring it up again right away, because honestly I didn't know how. You can't really stop in the middle of a park path and say, hey, weird question, how do you know about a thing I never told you? Not when the whole job is built on pretending the weird part isn't there. Still, that line sat in my head through the entire walk. The conversation itself was light, easy even, music, food, a show he had started watching, a trail he said we should try when it warms up again. Again with that sense of future continuity, not if we keep seeing each other. Just when, and the strangest part, I was getting used to it. That's what scared me more than anything else at that stage, not his questions, not the mismatched memories, just the fact that I was adapting. I was learning how to stay inside the structure without resisting it, how to answer just enough, how to let the gaps pass without drawing attention to them, how to become smooth. And the smoother I became, the easier everything felt, which should have made the job better. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because it meant the role was working. At one point, we sat down on a bench and Daniel got quieter for a little while, not upset, just more inward. Then he said something so casually I almost missed it. You seem better lately. I looked at him because that phrasing could go in a lot of directions. He kept looking ahead and added, last year you were harder to read. Last year, not the last meeting, not recently. Last year, I felt my chest go tight for a second. Because now the time scale had expanded. This wasn't just a few repeated references or a carried over conversation. He had a history in his head, a real one, long enough to include moods, patterns, personality shifts, and somehow I was inside it. I didn't answer right away, then I just said, yeah, maybe. Which is the kind of answer people use when they have nothing safe to say. He smiled faintly at that, like I'd confirmed something. And after that, I knew I couldn't keep pretending I'd simply wandered into an unusual job. This had layers, old ones, and I wasn't seeing most of them. When the meeting ended, I didn't even wait until I got home. I messaged Elise from my car. I kept it simple, asked directly, how long has he known the person I'm supposed to be replacing? She didn't answer for almost an hour, and when she did, it wasn't really an answer. It's better not to think about the role that way. That was the moment I almost quit, not because it was some big sinister reveal, but because it confirmed that my question was correct. If I had been wrong, she would have corrected me. Instead, she redirected, which meant yes, there had been someone, and not just casually, someone important enough that I wasn't being introduced as new, I was being folded in as continuous. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I typed out a response, deleted it, typed another one, deleted that too, because what was I even going to say? Hey, just checking, is this manipulative in a way that would permanently change how I feel about myself? Of course it was. The better question was why I hadn't walked away already, and the honest answer was still the same as before. Money, that ugly, boring answer behind so many terrible decisions, because every meeting paid well. Too well for how easy it looked from the outside. Coffee, walks, conversation, no physical labor, no heavy responsibility, no explanation anyone else would understand, and that combination is dangerous. Not because it looks bad, because it looks manageable. So I stayed, but something changed after that third meeting. I stopped thinking of Daniel as the strange part, and started thinking of Elise as the center of it, because Daniel felt sincere. That was the uncomfortable truth. He wasn't acting weird in a performative way. He wasn't toying with me. He wasn't giving me the feeling that he knew more than he should and enjoyed it. He just existed inside whatever version of reality had been built around him. Elise was the one shaping it, editing it, correcting it, managing it, and I still didn't know why. All I knew was this: I wasn't just pretending to be someone's friend. I was being trained into an existing emotional role, and the more naturally I played it, the less visible the seams became. Not just to Daniel, to me too. After that third meeting, I stopped thinking about quitting as a clean option. Not because I didn't want to leave, but because I wasn't sure what leaving would actually do. Because by that point, I had already stepped into something. And I didn't know if stepping out of it would just leave a gap, or if it would trigger something. That sounds dramatic, but when you're inside a system you don't understand, your brain starts filling in possibilities, and none of them feel safe. The next message from Elise didn't come right away. Almost 2 days passed, which was unusual. Up until then, everything had been tightly controlled, scheduled, timed so that silence felt intentional. Then finally I got a message. Next session will be longer. Evening, controlled environment. That wording again, controlled environment. That meant one thing: not public, not a cafe, not a park, somewhere private. And that immediately changed the feeling of everything. Because public spaces give you a kind of safety. Even if something feels off, there are people around. Noise, movement, a sense that you can step out at any moment. But private space, that's different. That's where patterns settle, where things can be maintained more precisely. She sent the address, apartment, not mine, not his. At least I didn't think it was his. No explanation, just arrive on time, let him lead. Do not introduce new topics. I read that last line twice. Do not introduce new topics, which meant the conversation wasn't open. It had boundaries, and I wasn't supposed to test them. I showed up exactly on time. The building was quiet, not rundown, not luxury. Just neutral, the kind of place you don't notice. I knocked. Daniel opened the door almost immediately. No surprise, like he had been waiting right there. Hey, same tone, same familiarity, but the setting changed everything because now I was inside his space, or at least a space he was comfortable in. And that made the whole thing feel more real, more grounded, which made the underlying problem worse because now there was no buffer, no external environment to blame, just us. Inside a room that felt lived in. Not messy, not perfectly arranged, just consistent. That word again, consistent. We sat down, and for the first time there was a stretch of silence at the beginning, not awkward, just waiting, like something was supposed to start, and neither of us moved first. Then he said, "You're on time today." That word hit immediately, today, which implied there had been days I was, but there hadn't, at least not me. Still, I nodded. Yeah. Because correcting him would break something, and I didn't know what. The conversation started slowly. More pauses than before, less structure, but also more depth. He asked about things that weren't surface level anymore. Not just work, not just general life, more personal, but framed like continuation, like he already knew the baseline and was checking for changes. At one point he said, "You don't do that thing anymore." I looked at him. What thing? He hesitated. Like he was trying to recall something clearly, then shook his head slightly. Never mind. That moment stayed with me, because it meant something had changed in his perception, something small but noticeable, and I had no idea what it was, which meant one thing: there were expectations I didn't know about, behaviors I was supposed to match but hadn't been told. And that's when the pressure really set in, because up until then I thought I could stay inside the lines, follow instructions, match tone. Now there were invisible details, things I couldn't prepare for, things only the previous person would have known, and I couldn't replicate those, no matter how well I adapted. The rest of the evening went smoothly on the surface, but underneath I could feel it. Small moments where something didn't line up perfectly. Tiny hesitations, not from him, from me, and each one felt like a risk. Like if I pushed too far outside whatever version he expected, something would break. Not loudly. Just subtly. At one point he stood up and went into the other room. Just for a minute, left me alone. And that's when I noticed something on the table, a photo, face down. I don't know why I picked it up. I shouldn't have, but I did. And when I turned it over, my stomach dropped, because it was him, Daniel, standing next to someone who looked just enough like me that it made everything click at once. Not identical, not even close, but similar enough in build. In posture, in presence, the kind of similarity you wouldn't notice casually but would feel over time. And that was the moment everything became clear. I wasn't just replacing a friend. I was replacing someone specific, someone real, someone who had been in this exact space, sitting in that exact position, having these exact conversations. And now I was filling that outline. Before I could look any closer, I heard him coming back. I put the photo down immediately, face down. Exactly how it was, and when he walked back in, he didn't say anything, didn't react, just sat down again, and continued like nothing had happened, but something had, because now I knew this wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't a vague role. It was a replacement, and I had no idea what happened to the original. After that night, I couldn't pretend it was just a job anymore, not in the same way. Before it had been strange, unclear. Now it had context, a real person. A real connection, and I was standing in the space they left behind. That changed everything. I didn't message Elise right away, not because I didn't want answers, because I already knew what kind of answers I'd get, careful, partial, redirected, so instead I waited, and the next morning she messaged first. Session quality dropped slightly, increase familiarity, reduce hesitation. That was it, no mention of the setting, no acknowledgement of the shift, no explanation. Just performance feedback, like nothing had changed, but something had, and now I couldn't ignore it, so I responded. Simple, direct, who was the person before me? She didn't reply for a while, longer than usual, and when she did, it wasn't immediate denial, it was worse. Focus on your role, that was it, no answer, just containment, which confirmed everything. There was someone, and she didn't want me thinking about them. That's when the discomfort shifted into something else. Not fear, but pressure, because now I wasn't just improvising inside something unclear. I was actively ignoring something real, and that takes effort, more than people think. The next meeting was scheduled quickly, sooner than usual, same apartment, same time. When I arrived, something felt different immediately. Not in the layout, not in the space, in him. Daniel opened the door and paused, just slightly, like something didn't match right away. Not confusion, recognition with a delay. Same word, but this time it wasn't automatic. I stepped inside, and for the first time I felt like I was catching up instead of continuing. We sat down again. Same positions, same space, but the rhythm was off, not broken, just less smooth, and I knew why, because I knew something now, and that changes how you act, even if you try to hide it. He noticed it too, not directly, but in small ways, longer pauses, Maury looking at me instead of through me. At one point he said, "You're quieter lately." That hit immediately, because that wasn't random. That was observation, comparison between me and whoever had been there before. I adjusted, tried to match the previous tone more. Maury relaxed, Maury open, but it felt forced now, and that made it worse because I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was compensating, trying to stay inside something I didn't fully understand, and every time I overcorrected, it created another small gap. At one point he asked, "Did you end up finishing that thing you were working on?" I had no idea what he meant. None, but instead of deflecting, I tried something different. "What do you mean?" Just to see, to test how specific it was. He paused, looked at me for a second longer than usual, then said, "You know what I mean." That wasn't a question, that was expectation. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. There were entire parts of his memory that I couldn't access. Conversations, experiences, details, and I was supposed to move through them like they were mine without ever being told what they were. That's not a role, that's a gap, and I was trying to fill it blind. I gave a vague answer. "Yeah, I've been working on it." He nodded like that was enough, but something in his expression changed slightly. Not suspicion, just adjustment, like he had updated something internally, and that's when it hit me again. He wasn't testing me. He was reconciling me against something that already existed, and every mismatch was being absorbed, quietly, without confrontation. That's what made it so unsettling, because there was no moment where it broke. No clear failure, just small shifts, corrections, like he was adapting just like I was. By the end of that meeting, I felt exhausted, not physically, mentally, because keeping up with something you can't fully see takes more effort than anything else. When I left, I didn't go home right away. I just sat in my car, thinking about the photo, about the conversation, about the gaps, and one question kept coming back. Not who was the person before me, but what happened to them, because people don't just disappear from someone's life like that, not without impact, not without explanation. And whatever explanation Daniel had, it didn't include the truth, which meant one thing: the system was protecting something. And I was part of that protection, whether I wanted to be or not. After that meeting, I stopped thinking about the job in terms of money, not completely, but it wasn't the main thing anymore, because at that point I was just showing up and talking. I was maintaining something that had existed before me and was continuing through me. And the more I thought about it, the less comfortable that became. The next few days I didn't hear from Elise, which should have felt like a break. But didn't, because now silence felt like part of the structure too, like gaps were intentional, like everything had a rhythm I wasn't fully aware of. So instead of waiting, I did something I hadn't done before. I tried to find information on my own, nothing extreme, just basic things. I searched the building address, looked up public listings, tried to see if I could find anything connected to Daniel, but there was almost nothing. No social media, no clear records, just fragments, a name tied to an old business registration, an address that matched the building, and that was it, which in itself was strange, because most people leave traces, photos, profiles, connections, something, but Daniel felt almost filtered, like only certain pieces were allowed to exist publicly. Don't know if that was intentional, but it added to the feeling that everything around this situation was controlled, not hidden, curated, that's a better word. The next message from Elise came late at night, not scheduled, not structured, just tomorrow, same location, be consistent. That last line again, be consistent. At this point, that word had taken on a different meaning, not just act the same. Maintain continuity, don't introduce breaks, don't create new patterns, just keep the existing one intact. I showed up the next day already tense, because now I wasn't walking into something unknown. I was walking into something I understood just enough to know it wasn't right. Daniel opened the door again. This time no pause, immediate recognition. Hey, and something about that made me uneasy because it meant whatever gap had been there before had already been adjusted. We sat down, same positions, same space, and for a while everything felt smooth again. Too smooth, like the previous friction had been absorbed, corrected. That thought stayed in the back of my head the whole time because it meant something important. The system didn't just rely on me adapting, it adapted too. That made it harder to detect, harder to push against. At one point he brought up something new. Are you still thinking about moving? That question caught me off guard because it wasn't vague. It implied an ongoing decision, something that had been discussed before and again. I had no context, but instead of answering vaguely, I did something different. I pushed slightly. Why do you ask? Just to see how he'd respond. He looked at me for a second, not confused, just checking something internally. Then said, you seemed pretty sure about it last time. Last time, that phrase again. And this time it landed differently because now I knew there was a last time, just not one I had been part of. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm still thinking about it. That felt safe, non-committal, consistent, and he accepted it, like it fit, like it belonged in whatever version of reality he was operating in. But something shifted after that, not visibly, just subtly. The conversation became slightly more careful, more measured, like he was paying closer attention. And I realized something in that moment. He might not know the truth, but he could feel the difference, not consciously, but instinctively, like something wasn't perfectly aligned anymore. And that made me more aware of every word I said, every pause, every small hesitation, because now it wasn't just about maintaining continuity, it was about not breaking something I didn't fully understand. At one point he stood up again, went into the other room, same as before, and again I was alone, same table, same space, and the photo was still there. Face down. I didn't pick it up this time, but I didn't need to, because I already knew what it showed. And more importantly, what it meant. When he came back, nothing was mentioned, no change, just continuation, and that's when I understood something clearly. This wasn't fragile, it didn't break easily, it absorbed inconsistencies, smoothed them out, adjusted around them, and that made it more stable than anything else, more stable than normal relationships, because normal ones depend on truth. This one depended on consistency, and consistency is easier to control. When the meeting ended, he said something that stayed with me longer than anything else that day. See you soon. Not scheduled, not specific, just certain, and for the first time that didn't feel like a plan. It felt like inevitability, like the pattern would continue whether I chose to stay or not. That night I didn't think about quitting, I thought about something else. If I walked away, would someone else take my place? And if they did, would Daniel even notice the change? Or would the system adjust again until everything felt right to him? Because if that was true, then I wasn't just replaceable. I was already part of something designed to replace people, and that's a very different kind of job. After that meeting, I stopped thinking about whether I should quit, and started thinking about what would happen if I did, because by that point, it didn't feel like I was the important part of the system. I felt interchangeable, and once that idea settles in, start asking different questions. Not is this wrong, but how many times has this already happened? That thought stuck with me the entire next day. I went through everything I could remember. The cafe, the park, the apartment, the phrases he used, the references, the gaps, and one thing became clearer the more I thought about it. Nothing Daniel said ever created new ground. He only built on what already existed, which meant one of two things. Either he wasn't aware anything had changed, or he was aware and choosing not to acknowledge it, and I didn't know which was worse. That night I made a decision. Not to quit, not yet, but to test something, not through Elise, not through instructions, directly. The next meeting was scheduled like normal, same apartment, same time. When I got there, everything felt stable again. Too stable, like the last few inconsistencies had been smoothed over completely. Daniel greeted me the same way. Hey, no hesitation, no delay. And that confirmed something. Whatever adjustment had happened, it had already been integrated. We sat down, conversation started easily, and I let it go on for a while, normal, comfortable. Then I did something different. I broke the pattern, not dramatically, just slightly. He mentioned something about going somewhere again, and instead of agreeing, I said, I don't remember that, just that, simple, but direct. For the first time he paused, not briefly, noticeably, looked at me. Not confused, not suspicious, just processing like something didn't line up. Then he smiled, small, and said, yeah, you do. That response hit harder than anything else so far because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't corrective, it was stabilizing, like he wasn't trying to prove me wrong. He was trying to bring me back into alignment, and that told me everything. He wasn't reacting to truth, he was maintaining continuity, even if it meant ignoring what I said. The conversation continued, but now I was watching differently, looking for cracks, moments where things didn't fit, and I found them, small ones, a detail repeated slightly differently. A timeline that didn't quite match, but every time he adjusted, not consciously, not visibly, just enough to keep everything flowing. Like water finding a new path around a stone. That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't fragile at all. It didn't depend on me being perfect. It depended on the system correcting around me, which meant I wasn't the main variable. I was just one part of a larger structure. At one point, I pushed a little further. Hey, how did we meet again? That question should have stopped everything. If this was normal, if this was real. That's the kind of question that creates a pause, forces reflection. But he didn't pause long. He leaned back slightly, like he was recalling something familiar, then said, "You know how," not an answer. A closure, a way to avoid defining it, and that was more revealing than anything else, because it meant the origin didn't matter, only the continuation. After that I stopped pushing, not because I was satisfied, because I understood the limit. The system didn't break, it absorbed, redirected, maintained itself, and that meant something else. Even if I exposed the truth directly, it might not change anything because the structure itself didn't depend on truth, it depended on consistency. When I left that night, I didn't feel confused anymore. I felt certain, not about what was happening exactly, but about one thing: this wasn't about helping Daniel, it wasn't about therapy, it wasn't even about replacing a person, it was about maintaining a version of reality, and I was inside it. The next question came naturally. Not what is this, but who is it really for? Because if Daniel wasn't the one controlling it, then someone else was, and I already knew who that was. After that night, I stopped treating Elise like a background part of the job, because it was obvious now. She wasn't just coordinating it, she was maintaining it. Everything, the schedule, the tone, the structure. Even the gaps, and once you realize someone is controlling the system, you stop asking what's happening and start asking why. The next message I sent her wasn't careful, not like before. I didn't try to phrase it nicely, didn't try to stay within whatever boundaries she had set. I just asked, does he know the person he's talking to isn't real? No explanation, no soft wording, just that. She didn't respond right away, but this time the silence felt different. Not part of the pattern, Maury-like resistance. Then about an hour later I got a reply, and it wasn't like her usual messages, longer, more deliberate. Daniel is responding to a stable relational structure. Your role is to support that stability. Framing it in terms of real or not real is not useful. I read that 3 times because that wasn't an answer. It was a correction, not of the situation, of how I was thinking about it, and that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about truth, it was about control. Control over perception, control over continuity, control over what counted as real. That's when I realized something else. I wasn't the first person to ask that question. There's no way I was, which meant this system had already handled that kind of resistance before, probably more than once. The next meeting came sooner than expected. No delay, no adjustment, just tomorrow, same time, like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't just challenged the entire structure, and that made it clear. My awareness didn't matter. As long as I kept showing up, I almost didn't go. Sat there for a long time that evening thinking about it, because now I understood the situation, at least enough. And once you understand something like that, continuing becomes a choice, not a mistake, a decision. But in the end, I went because I needed to see one more thing, not the system, him. When I arrived, everything felt the same. Same building, same hallway, same door. I knocked. And when Daniel opened it, there was no hesitation, no delay, just recognition. Hey, exactly the same. And that's when I knew, whatever cracks I thought I had created, they were already gone. Repaired, we sat down again, conversation started. And this time I didn't try to follow the pattern perfectly, but I didn't break it either. I stayed just slightly off, not enough to disrupt everything, but enough to feel the edges. And I watched him closely, looking for something, anything, a moment of awareness, a sign of doubt, but it never came, because every time something didn't match perfectly, he adjusted, not consciously, but effectively, like his brain was smoothing over inconsistencies in real time. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just external. It wasn't just Elise controlling things from the outside. The system existed inside him too. He was part of it, maintaining it, without even knowing. At one point I stopped mid-conversation, just completely, didn't say anything, didn't react, just silence. He looked at me, waited, then said, "You're thinking too much again." Again, that word again. But this time it felt different, because it wasn't about a past event. It was about a pattern of behavior, something that had been noticed before, by someone else, and now applied to me. That's when I understood the full scope of it. This wasn't just about replacing a person. It's about preserving a relationship. A dynamic, a version of interaction that could survive even when the people inside it changed. And I had become part of that continuity. Not because I was unique, but because I fit. That realization didn't scare me. It did something worse. It made everything feel replaceable. Not just me, him too, because if the structure mattered more than the individuals, then anyone could be swapped out as long as the pattern stayed intact. When I left that night, I didn't feel confused anymore. I didn't feel curious either. I felt done, not emotionally, structurally, because I had seen enough to understand the system. And once you understand something like that, staying inside it becomes a very different kind of risk, not immediate, but long-term. Subtle, the kind that changes how you think before you notice it happening. That was the last meeting I went to, not because something dramatic happened, because nothing did, and that was the problem. I didn't tell Elise I was quitting, I just stopped responding. No explanation, no message, because at that point I knew how communication worked in that system. Anything I said would be redirected, framed differently, turned into something manageable, and I didn't want to give it that chance, so I just didn't go. The next day nothing happened, no messages, no calls, which almost made me question it, because I expected something, pushback, follow-up, anything, but there was nothing. And that silence felt intentional, like my absence had already been accounted for. That thought sat with me longer than anything else, because it meant one thing: the system didn't depend on me. Not really, I was just a part that could be removed or replaced. 2 days passed, then 3, still nothing. No contact from Elise, no sign of anything continuing. And slowly life started to feel normal again, not completely, but enough. I stopped checking my phone constantly. Stopped replaying conversations in my head, stopped thinking about the structure. At least during the day. At night it was different. That's when it came back, not the details, just the feeling that something had been maintained around me without me fully understanding it, and that I had stepped out of it without knowing what replaced me. A week later I got a message, not from Elise, from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just one line. "Hey, are you still coming today?" My chest tightened immediately, because I knew who it was, not logically, just instinctively. Daniel, but that wasn't possible. I had never given him my number, not once. Everything had been arranged through Elise. There was no direct contact. That was part of the structure. So how did he have it? I didn't reply. I just stared at the message. Read it again, then again, because it didn't sound confused. It didn't sound like someone reaching out randomly. It sounded normal. Like a continuation, like I had missed something I was supposed to show up for, and that's what made it worse. Not the message itself. The tone, the assumption that I was still part of it, that nothing had changed. I didn't answer. I put my phone down, tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was a mistake, but that didn't work because the timing matched, the day matched, everything lined up too well. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, not the fact that he messaged me. The fact that he expected me to be there, which meant, from his perspective, nothing had ended. There was no gap, no break in the pattern, just continuation. The next morning there was another message. Same number. Did something change? Short but different, because now there was uncertainty, a small one but noticeable. And that was the first real crack I had seen, not in the system, in him, because for the first time something didn't align perfectly, and he noticed. I still didn't respond. I didn't know what to say, because anything I said would either pull me back in or break something I didn't understand, so I stayed out of it, or at least I tried to. That afternoon I got one more message, and this one felt different. "Are you okay?" No expectation, no assumption, just concern, and that hit harder than anything else, because that wasn't part of the structure. That was real, or at least it felt real, and that's when the line blurred completely. Because if something inside that system could still be real, then what exactly had I been part of? And more importantly, what was I walking away from? I didn't answer that message either. I just let it sit there, unread after that, because I knew something now. If I responded, even once, I wouldn't just be talking to him. I'd be stepping back into the pattern, and I didn't know if I'd be able to step out again. I didn't answer, not that day, not the next one either. I just left the messages there and tried to move forward, and for a while that almost worked. I went back to normal freelance stuff, picked up a couple new clients, started sleeping better, started checking my phone less, started letting the whole thing feel like something I had stepped out of, something strange, something manipulative, something I was lucky to leave when I did. And honestly, that version of the story would have been easier. The kind where you realize a job is wrong, you stop going, and that's the end of it. But that's not what happened, because about 5 days after the last message, I got an email, not from Elise, from Daniel, and that was the moment I realized the structure around this thing had already broken in some way. Because there was no reason he should have had my email either. The subject line just said, "I'm sorry if I missed something," that alone made my stomach drop, because the tone was completely different from Elise. No controlled wording. No vague emotional management language, just uncertainty. I opened it, and the whole thing was short, really short. He said he wasn't sure if he was allowed to contact me directly, but he thought maybe something had changed and nobody had explained it properly. He said he didn't want to make me uncomfortable. He just didn't understand why the routine stopped so suddenly. That word again, routine, not friendship, not visits, routine. And right there, for the first time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before, not fear, not anger. Guilt, because up until then I had framed him in my head as part of the system. Not the designer, not the manipulator, just part of it, but still part of it. That email made him feel different. Less like someone inside a controlled structure, more like someone living in it without access to the walls. And that changed the emotional shape of everything. I still didn't reply, but now it wasn't because I was purely protecting myself. Part of it was because I genuinely didn't know what would help. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I was being paid to pretend continuity with someone you used to know, and I only figured out halfway through that I was replacing a real person. And then I left because the entire situation was quietly horrifying. You can't send that in an email, not responsibly, not casually, not without detonating something you don't understand. So I waited, again, and a day later Elise finally reached out. First message from her since I disappeared. It said, "Please do not respond to any direct contact. It will destabilize things unnecessarily." That line made me angrier than I expected, because it confirmed 2 things immediately. First, she knew he had contacted me, which meant she was still monitoring the situation closely. Second, she didn't care about the truth of it, only the stability, only the continuity, only the system staying intact, and I was tired of that word by then, stability. Because when people use it enough, it starts sounding moral. Like preserving calm is automatically the right thing to do, but calm and honesty are not the same thing, and a stable lie is still a lie. So for the first time since this all started, I pushed back. I replied, "What exactly do you think I'm destabilizing?" She answered faster than usual, too fast, like she'd been waiting for me to break silence. Her response was longer than any message she'd sent before. She said Daniel had gone through a prolonged period of emotional disruption after a significant relational loss. She said abrupt removal of familiar social structures had previously resulted in severe withdrawal, functional decline, and treatment setbacks. She said the arrangement was designed to prevent discontinuity while new long-term support conditions were established. That's how she phrased it. Not healing, not friendship, not trust, support conditions. And then came the line that stayed with me longest. She said, "You were not replacing a person. You were preserving an emotional pathway." I remember staring at that sentence for a long time, because it was the clearest thing she had said the entire time, and it was also the coldest. Not replacing a person, preserving a pathway. That's not how people talk unless they've already stripped the human part out of a situation. And once they've done that, almost anything can sound acceptable. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as careful, or thoughtful, or even misguided. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had simply chosen a language that made it sound clean, clinical, necessary, and I was done letting that language do the work for her. So I asked the question I'd been circling around from the start. I wrote, "What happened to the person before me?" This time she didn't dodge. Not exactly. She just answered in the most Elise way possible. She said, "He is no longer available for participation." I actually laughed when I read that, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. That's how she described a human being disappearing from someone's life, no longer available for participation, like a cancelled subscription, like a failed vendor, like a software component they had to work around. I asked if he had died, no answer. I asked if Daniel knew he was gone, no answer. I asked if Daniel knew I had been hired. And to that, finally, she replied, "Daniel understands continuity in the form most useful to him." That sentence told me everything. No, he didn't know, at least not in any honest way. He had been given a version of reality optimized for smoothness, and everyone around him had agreed to live inside it, including me, even if only for a little while. I didn't respond after that. There was nothing left to say, because by then the mechanics were clear. The only unclear part was what I owed him now. Daniel, I mean, not Elise, not the system, him, because there's a point where protecting stability starts to look a lot like deciding for someone that they can't survive the truth. And I don't know if that was fair. I still don't, but I knew one thing with complete certainty. I was not going back in, not for one more visit, not for one more carefully structured conversation, not to smooth anything over. Because the moment I stepped back into that pattern, I'd be part of maintaining it again. And I couldn't do that now that I understood what it was built on. So I blocked Elise, didn't dramatize it, didn't warn her, just blocked the number, archived the emails, removed the whole thing from my phone as much as I could. Then I sat there for a while looking at Daniel's last email, not answering, not deleting it, just looking at it, because even then I knew that wasn't really the end. Not emotionally, not structurally, not for me, and definitely not for him. I never replied to Daniel, and that's the part I still think about the most. Not the job, not Elise, not even the way everything was structured, just that decision, because it would have been easy to answer. Not easy in a simple way, but easy in the sense that all I had to do was type something. Anything. "Hey, sorry, things changed. I can't make it anymore. I hope you're doing okay." Something small. Something human, but I didn't, because I knew the moment I replied, I wouldn't just be sending a message, I'd be stepping back into something. Not the job, the pattern, and I didn't trust myself to step back out again, so I left it, unread after that, archived, like if I moved it out of sight it would feel like it didn't exist, and for a while that worked. Life moved on, new work, new routine, normal conversations, real ones. Kind where you don't have to think about tone or continuity or what version of yourself you're supposed to be. And slowly, the whole experience started to feel distant. Not gone, just quieter, like something that happened a long time ago. Then one night, maybe a month later, something small happened. I was out with a friend, nothing special, just dinner, and at one point he said, "Did you tell me that story already?" And I paused, because I hadn't, at least I didn't think I had. For a second, it felt like I had, like there was a version of that conversation that already existed, and I just hadn't been there for it. That feeling hit harder than it should have, because it was familiar. Not the situation, the structure, that slight misalignment, that sense of continuity where there shouldn't be any. And I realized something in that moment. I hadn't just been inside that system. I had learned it, not consciously, but enough that I could feel when something almost matched it. That's the part that stayed, not the details, the pattern, because once you experience something like that, your brain starts recognizing it. Even where it doesn't belong, I don't think anything followed me. I really don't. I don't think Elise tracked me. I don't think Daniel kept trying after that, at least not in any way I could see, but I do think something changed, not outside, inside, because now, every time I meet someone new, there's a moment. Small. Where I wonder, am I actually starting something new, or just continuing something I don't remember? And I don't like that question, because it doesn't have a clean answer. Most of the time, everything feels normal, real, unstructured, but every once in a while there's a pause, a sentence that feels slightly familiar, a reaction that lines up too well, a moment that feels like it already happened, just out of reach, and for a split second I'm back there, not in the apartment, not in the cafe. Just inside that idea, that continuity matters more than truth, that people can be replaced as long as the pattern stays intact. And that thought doesn't go away completely, it just sits there, quiet like something waiting to be picked up again. And maybe that's the part that bothers me most, not what happened, not how it worked, but how easy it would be to step back into it, if I ever answered that message, if I ever replied, if I ever decided that maintaining something was more important than understanding it, because now I know how convincing that can feel, and how smooth it becomes once you stop questioning it. Anyway, that's where I'm going to leave this. No real conclusion, no explanation, just something that happened and something I chose to step out of. Alright, that's going to be it for this one. A little different from the usual stories. More quiet, more psychological. If you made it this far, you're probably either deep into your game or already half asleep. Either way, I hope it helped you relax a bit. And like always, leave a comment and let me know what you were doing while listening. I'll see you in the next one.